Okay, it's 7:30. We're in the council chambers. We'll call to order the City of Brainerd Economic Development Authority meeting. Jennifer, please call the roll.
Bevins?
Here.
Beezer?
Here.
Kirsch?
Here.
O'Day?
Here.
Yeager?
Yes.
Johnson?
Here. Next-
Mr. Chair, I move to adopt the agenda with the addition of Mary Devine Johnson from Visit Brainerd.
Second, Yeager.
Informational.
We have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda with adding Visit Brainerd under 7 informational. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Next up is the consent calendar. Notice to public. All matters listed are considered routine by the commission and will all be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless good cause is shown prior to the time the commission votes on the motion to be adopted by roll call.
Move to adopt the consent calendar.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt the consent calendar. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote by roll call.
Bevins?
Yes.
Beezer?
Yes.
Kirsch?
Yes.
O'Day?
Yes.
Yeager?
Yes.
And Johnson?
Yes, that motion carries. That brings us to number 5, old business. 5A is the discussion of business retention questions from Bladek. So Jennifer, do you want to take this?
So at the last meeting, you had received a copy during the meeting of Bladek's questions and had asked that this be put back on the agenda. The chair had asked that people reach out to Tyler directly if they had any questions. I did get an email from Marie Kirsch with a number of different items that she was recommending. Tyler Glenn is not able to be here today. He had another commitment, but Allison is here to provide any feedback or answer any questions.
All right, is there any discussion? Are we going to get responses from Tyler to Marie's questions and comments?
Mr. Chair, I believe we just received the email.
I'm wondering if we are going to receive responses from Tyler. Yeah, we're expecting to.
I would expect to, yes.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on the questionnaires, Tony?
So I read through these and I think they're very good. The only thing that I was thinking that might be helpful is asking the businesses if there's anything Bladek or the community can do to resolve any issues that they have. That way we're kind of proactive, like in regards to employment. Maybe we do something at the schools or a club or what else is out there. But I think a lot of these professionals are very bright and they might come up with solutions that we haven't even thought of yet.
Yeah, I sent some suggestions to Tyler. I know this isn't like systematically administered, so I don't know how important it is to collect some of the suggestions I put in there, but just getting some more basic demographic info. Is it a women-owned business? The gender, age of the business owner, just in case there's other grant opportunities that come up, that would flag so that if this is in some sort of database, they can reach out to those businesses proactively. I just said under the business life stage section, if they're saying that they're looking to exit their business, that maybe that flags just a follow-up to see if they need help with succession planning. And yeah, just some other coding things for like if we want to code out the business type again for like flagging it for if grant opportunities or funding opportunities come up, if they have this in a database, that there's an easy way to send out that information to specific businesses that might qualify for it. So yeah, I put that in an email. I guess I don't need a response to it, but if they want to implement any of that, I just looked over the goals that we kind of specifically set for how we wanted to use this, and it was pretty vague, but we just wanted to make sure that we capture information on businesses and are able to help businesses if they need assistance. So my suggestions were pretty much limited to just being able to categorize those businesses, and so Bladek could hopefully more easily reach out to those types of businesses if different opportunities come up. So that's all I got.
Thanks, Marie. Thanks, Tony. So I suppose we'll just look forward to hearing from Tyler next month to see if any of these changes are implemented or or why they are bad ideas. But they're not, they're great ideas. Any other discussion on the Blade Act questions? We don't really have action on this, it was just kind of
I just have one, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I know that there's a question on there regarding barrier to increasing workforce. I was envisioning a question that is greatest obstacle to just greater growth in general. Just a write-in style question that allows the applicant to just say, maybe it's not employees, maybe it's not business, maybe it's traffic, just a broader question to say, what is your greatest obstacle to future growth is kind of what I was thinking, but that's all I had, Mr.
it's
Chair.
more general growth as opposed
Correct,
to.
yep, just allow them to write in, what's holding them back in general. Not workforce related, not necessarily workforce related. But that's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kevin. Seeing no other discussion, we'll move on to the next item, which is we just finished that one. It is the review draft set of Tier 1 materials from Swanson Hascamp, and Jennifer will handle this. Jennifer might introduce Jennifer, I don't know.
Which one?
Mr. Chair, I can introduce Jennifer. So as you know, the EDA has contracted with Swanson Hascamp Consulting to help us with the development or redevelopment of parcels throughout the city. In your packet, Jennifer included a pretty detailed set of information about our opportunities and specifically on our Tier 1 properties. And so she has asked for about 20 minutes of the EDA's time to be able to kind of walk through this information and get some feedback and offer some recommendations. So Jennifer Hascamp.
All right, clock's ticking, 20 minutes, let's go.
There's always a time limit around here.
No, I'm kidding, we can go all day. I have Kinder Friend Day at 10 o'clock.
All right, sounds great. So first of all, it's really nice to be with you in person. I know several of you, obviously, from other commissions in the council, but there's a few of you that I haven't met in person, so it's nice to be here. The packet materials that I provided you today obviously were quite extensive and long, and so I realize you may not have had the opportunity to go through everything that's in there, so I thought I would hit on the highlights and walk you through why some of this is incredibly important, especially as we consider what types of development or redevelopment might be suited on the properties that we've identified through the initial part of this process. So the report was broken into 3 categories or sections, if you will. The intent of that is that the first piece, being the socioeconomic and demographic information, feeds into what type of housing demand, for example, we might have here in the city. It also plays into employment. So this portion of the report, or this phase of the report, is focused really on the downtown underutilized parking lot spaces. However, the demographic stuff you'll see repeatedly as we go through this process. Excuse me. So from that perspective, I thought it would be important for us to kind of hit on that demographic information before we move on. So the first part is we essentially took the information for Brainerd City proper and compared that against the county in terms of a regional sort of perspective or snapshot. The information that we used is actually from, it's Esri, or it's GIS, some folks call it. But anyway, the data source is very robust and compiles all the information from the American Community Survey and the census. So the data that's in here is about as current as you can get, which does lag by about 2 years generally. So the information in here does include some information from the census, 2020 census, but it also then includes some projections between 2020 and 2022. All right, so it's a pretty current snapshot in terms of the data. So what you'll see here is the city of Brainerd proper. When we look at this, a couple key things stand out to me in terms of what might impact our development and redevelopment opportunities in the community. So the first one being that second box down, which is the generations. So I'm a planning geek also in relation to, Commissioner Yeager looks at me like she is, that's true. And so what I like to do is if we look at generations, for example, the millennial generation, people talk about that a lot. the Gen Zers that are coming up behind them. What does that mean in terms of real estate or the housing market? Well, it turns out it means a lot, because these generations that are coming up behind, the millennials and the Gen Zers, have very different preferences as a whole when it comes to housing. So, for example, the millennials are going to be, or are, the number one cohort for home purchasing as it stands today. That trend will continue forward. So understanding what they want and what they need is incredibly important, because they're the number one buying group, okay? Gen Zers, on the other hand, are just entering their not necessarily ownership, but their first homes. And so from that perspective, what they want and what they need is going to be different than, obviously, Gen X or the boomer generation. So from that perspective, those two cohorts are driving new housing in many ways. What we've found is that millennials and Gen Zers tend to be looking for housing that is in places that are walkable, that are compact. They like Main Street. They like smaller local mom and pop shops. And that's the trend. So it's not saying that they're automatically going to live in a major metropolitan area. In fact, that's becoming increasingly difficult, because the pricing in those types of regions prices them out of the market. So what they've started to do is look for other locations where they might purchase or where they might rent. So in Brainerd, you'll see here, 26% of your population already are millennials, while 23% are Gen Zers. Those are big numbers. Those numbers will likely increase also, but those are big numbers. And when you compare those against the county as a whole, they're bigger by about 10%. That's pretty significant, especially when we think of what types of housing might be supported here. The other thing, which doesn't come forward 100% here, but you can kind of infer, is that your younger generations, the Gen X and Gen Zers, are becoming more educated. So if you look at that right-hand box in terms of the education, 41% of your population has some college, so they have some post-secondary, whether that's job training, employment training, or if it's a traditional college or if it's the community college. 18% of your population has a bachelor's, graduate, or professional degree. Those numbers have been trending up, which does correlate with also you've got a bigger Gen X, or not Gen X, excuse me, millennial and Gen Z population. So those things matter a lot, especially when we start to talk about what might be in demand for housing here. So if we can slide down a little bit. So the Brainerd Consumer Analysis is the next snapshot. I always like this data set because it's kind of interesting and it's not something that shows up in your comprehensive plan, for example. So what we have here is actually what the median household incomes are, what your per capita income is. You can see on the right-hand side, annual household spending. Pets amazingly have become one of the biggest differences or changes as a result of the pandemic. Since the pandemic, over 65% of households nationally have a pet of some kind. It's a huge number. I bring it up only because it absolutely impacts what type of housing, what type of amenities people are looking for. So if we put an apartment in downtown, probably want to make sure that it's pet friendly, because these trends have a huge impact on where people choose to live. If they can't bring their dog, they're not going to live downtown. So retail and restaurants, annual lifestyle spending, and internet access. Excuse me, internet access is also incredibly important. I'll touch on this later in the report, but essentially what's happening is most companies, especially Fortune 500s, 100s, anyone competing with them for the labor force, have basically gone to a hybrid work model. Now, hybrid means something different to everybody, and everyone's doing it a little bit different. But that hybrid environment is incredibly flexible, but it demands that the worker have access to internet at home and has office space at home that they can use, right? So again, direct impact on the housing type and what types of amenities need to be here. Brainerd is in good shape from the standpoint of you have good internet. If somebody needed to work from home, They could do that. It's interesting, there's a lot of cities where that's just not the case. That automatically is going to reduce people's ability to move into an area if they need that hybrid environment. So again, access to internet doesn't sound that flashy, but it's incredibly important, especially as we transition into this hybrid work model. So the other thing that I will mention is you may have noticed when you looked at Brainerd as compared to the county as a whole, that the annual household income, average household income in Brainerd is lower than the county as a whole. That's not surprising because Brainerd's younger, all right? So because Brainerd is younger, you're not in your, you're sort of at those entry-level positions. A lot of people or folks are. Their wages tend to be less. They're not in their highest earning potential years. So as a result, it pulls down that annual household income. Also, you may have noticed that there are a lot more single people, unmarried people in Brainerd as compared to the county. Again, that has a strong tie to age. And then as a result, obviously, it's going to pull down those incomes as well. So all of those trends matter, especially when we look at, well, what could be supported from a market perspective, and as we look at different sites throughout the community. So if we go to the next one. Housing and employment, once again, this is important because if we want people to pay rents or if we want people to purchase homes, obviously we need to know what kind of jobs they have, what kind of incomes we can expect, and what would be supported. What you see here I thought was really interesting. Almost 58% of your population are in what are classified as white-collar jobs. Again, that's important because a lot of those types of jobs have the ability to do hybrid work models. So as a result, you might see a trend in that direction, especially over the next 5 to 10 years. It also impacts wages, obviously, and also has the ability to potentially attract folks from outside of the area because those jobs, if those jobs are here, they may be able to move here. The other piece is hybrid and satellite work allows people a lot greater flexibility in terms of where they want to live and where they choose to live. So you can see here that you've got a pretty, and I know you all know this, but a strong mix of renter and owner-occupied housing units, right? You're almost 50-50. So from that perspective, a lot of times folks will say, oh, I want more owner-occupied opportunities. Perfectly understandable. But oftentimes we do say that 50-50 or 60-40, something like that, is actually a fairly balanced housing stock because it gives a lot of people choices. What's not reflected in here but is talked about later is the fact that actually in the region as a whole and in Brainerd, the number of available market rate apartments is incredibly low. So nearly all of your apartment stock is subsidized in some way. And so if you're a professional, for example, let's call you a Gen Z professional, making a decent salary and wage, your housing choice for a market rate rental unit is incredibly low. That's very significant in terms of how you attract people to the area. In fact, we called, I think, every single apartment in the area just to kind of make sure that we weren't missing something. There were 3 units available that we could find in the entire region. So if you think about that, how do you get someone to move here, right? So the other piece of this, if you look at your median housing values, they are lower, obviously, than the county as a whole. That is in part due to the age of your structures. Your median house or median age of your structure is about 20 years older than the county as a whole. That plays a huge role, obviously. Also, older houses tend to be smaller. So on a price per foot, you're not necessarily a lot cheaper, but your product is smaller. So as a result, you see those numbers come down as well. So if we move on. All right, so section 2 was really about summary of the market analysis of a regional perspective. So this gets outside of Brainerd and even Crow Wing County to a large extent, because there are things happening in our marketplace that I think have a strong potential to impact Brainerd. and what you do. So I already touched on the fact that most large companies have essentially gone to a hybrid work model. We've done a fair amount of research at our company about what this actually translates to. Many companies are saying employees only have to be on campus, work campus, or in the office. Some are saying once a week. Some are saying a couple times a month. Some have identified a full week in a month, but then the rest of the time you're free. So everybody's doing things a little bit differently. I bring it up because as companies figure out how to do this, it will free up the employee or the worker's ability to choose where they live. I know it sounds like a far distance to go down to Maple Grove, but I'll tell you that I drove from St. Paul this morning. It was early. Don't get me wrong, it was very early. My alarm went off at 4:15 and I was like, what is happening? Anyway, but if you only had to do it once or twice a month, it's not that much, right? And if you can spend half the amount on your housing and live in the playground of nature here, and you only have to do it once or twice, I think there's a huge opportunity there, right? I also will tell you, I could not believe how much traffic there was on my way up here, heading north. It was fascinating because I kept looking at the clock thinking, how it's 5:30 and there's all of these people that are on the road. So it's unbelievable. And it really, if we start shifting the way we think about it, there's a huge opportunity to capture, especially some of those Gen Zers who are looking for that environment that has Main Street, which you have, and you have all the lakes, and you have all the recreation. And so you have all of these amenities that exist that are highly desirable when we look at what millennials and Gen Zers are saying they want. So I'm not saying it's not challenging to figure that out, but I think there's an opportunity. So you did see an increase in your population throughout the pandemic because people, obviously, who had cabins or summer retreats here ended up coming and just staying because they didn't have to go into work. Well, that's becoming the new norm in terms of expectations. Down in the cities, when I watch the news, there is a continuing struggle to maintain good talent at jobs and in the workplace. And so even companies who said, no, you're coming back, have now reversed course because people said, if I have to come back, I quit. We have such a worker shortage that they're all changing. And so that trend, I think, is likely to continue, right? Sounds crazy, but as things develop here, I always say you have to get the first thing going first. But once something happens, it breaks the seal, essentially. If we can do that, other people will tell other people, and it will grow, right? And if people know that they can live here and also, work in Maple Grove or St. Cloud or whatever it is, and it's very easy and conducive, it's sort of that word of mouth that gets folks to start coming to the area. So, but the number one thing, obviously, is we need more market types of rents in the region and in the city. So, lastly, just because I really like the word, I have a millennial who works for me, and she's constantly teaching me stuff. That's what I've learned. And millennials have coined this term suburban, and I don't know if you've heard it before. I had not, but it's the combination of suburban and urban. Okay, and so it's not a typo. It really is suburban. And the idea behind suburban is that millennials and Gen Zers are looking for Main Street, right? They like to support the local business. They don't like chains. There's stories all over the place about how Applebee's is dying because millennials won't go there, et cetera, right? And so the thing that I think is so great about Brainerd is that you do have Main Street. You have downtown. When we looked at every other town in the Crow Wing County area, you have the most intact, clear downtown that is walkable, that has local shops, that has the opportunity for more local shops and restaurants. And so if we can get more population, it will support more local businesses and hopefully bring in more, right? So it's that cycle. Already touched on internet, so we're going to move past that. All right, so housing market considerations, lots of this I'm sure you already know and I've heard about before, but essentially it says there's a shortage, right? There's several reports out there that have been done by the HRA that Bladek has put together. All you have to do is look at the census information, and we know that we've got an undersupply of housing. It was mentioned several times that employers say one of their number one challenges, which probably will come out in some of your surveys, is the fact that there's nowhere for people to live. So even if you might be able to attract the worker, there's nowhere for them to live. If there's nowhere to live, they're not going to move here, right? And so we've got to figure out how to increase that supply and increase the housing. So they're pretty big numbers when you look through the bullets here, right? We all know that we have challenges in terms of the construction market and how much it costs to build stuff today. We've got supply shortages. So we've got the whole recipe to make the world hard, right? So as I mentioned, the rental market today is really dominated by subsidized housing or affordable housing. We have an undersupply of any market rate types of products. The way forward of that is, in my opinion, you got to get one, right? So you may have seen that Baxter approved a very large market rate apartment project. Even with that project, there still remains demand for additional units. Also, I would argue if you are successful at getting some of those units in downtown, you will be more attractive to some of those millennial and Gen Z populations because you have downtown. And where that project is in Baxter just doesn't have that same characteristic. All right, so if we could just move on. All right, so the final section is really looking at specific parcels. These were the first collection of Tier 1 properties that we talked about over the last couple months. I thought it would be helpful if we just went through a little bit in terms of the zoning, because we've got proposed zoning. My firm is working on that. It's not quite adopted. Crossing my fingers that we get there in the next 30 to 45 days. So because I'm an optimist, I use that zoning because what that zoning does on these 3 parcels that we identified is called Main Street. Main Street zoning, as it's currently proposed, would reinforce the character, the patterns, and the forms that are currently in downtown. So if a new project comes in, it has to have certain characteristics in order for it to fit in sort of that Main Street area. So I thought a summary would be helpful because I know some of you have not been part of that process. So the Tier 1 sites that were the underutilized parking lots, conveniently for me as I went through this, were all zoned Main Street or proposed to be zoned Main Street. In our proposed zoning, we've identified essentially 2 different frontage types or building frontage types that would be permitted in Main Street. So the first one are shop fronts, kind of goes without saying. Main floor are retail establishments, for example. They might be a professional office. They might be a restaurant. But you have to have a shop front facade and no residential on the main floor. Everything above can be residential, right? So that's on your left-hand side. Common entry, people think of oftentimes as, I can't remember what, somebody mentioned something to me about, well, that's only an office, right? And actually there's several examples of how a common entry building is actually main floor, is commercial, retail, et cetera. The second, third floor, et cetera, are also residential units, all right? So those are the two types that can be on Main Street. No residential is permitted on the main floor. So main floor has to be some kind of commercial, retail, office, et cetera. And then on the upper floors, we want residential, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could also be an office building. You could have office suites above it as well. So we performed a development capacity analysis, which is on the following pages, to go through the proposed standards and then looked at the 3 sites. And so the other thing to note, because I know parking is always a hot topic here too, is that Main Street in the current code doesn't have a parking minimum, right? But from what I know about the marketplace, and I do development myself, and I know how banks look at financing, you've got to have some parking associated with these uses, or in all likelihood, finding financing is going to be difficult. So we did include parking on each of our analyses just from a market perspective. And so the other piece I would say to that is it's not likely going to be underground parking, right? The cost for underground parking is so exorbitant that you would have to have a significant number of units in order to support the underground parking. I just priced out a project. The underground parking was over $1 million of the project. So if you have tight margins already, $1 million breaks it, right? So we were looking at options that are surface parking based on the code, right? So as a reminder and a refresher, these are the 3 parcels that we looked at. Fortunately for me, they were all zoned the same. However, they're all a little bit different size, right? Also, you might notice that we have 2 different conditions. We have corner parcels, and then we also have an interior lot. So B is interior, A and C are corners. That's important because we have different setbacks related to the parking. So we'll run through that quickly. So if we go to the next. All right, so we broke it out by each parcel and then did a development capacity analysis or a constraint analysis, depending on how you look at it. You see on the left-hand side are the zoning standards. On the right-hand side are sort of the characteristics of the site that are applicable. Our new code says that we've got 0-foot setbacks on our side yards and our rear yard. We've got a build-to line, which is 0 to 6 feet. For those of you who are unfamiliar with a build-to line, it means that the facade of the building actually has to be constructed between 0 and 6 feet of the property line. The intent of that is to reinforce what's happening already on Main Street or Laurel and make sure that buildings are snugged up against that parcel boundary to kind of create that walkable environment. So we've got the build-to line of 0 to 6 feet. And then we've got surface parking has to be set back at least 60 feet from the right-of-way. All right, so the idea here, of course, is we don't want seas of parking on our main street. We want buildings, right? So if there's going to be surface parking, we want it in the back. We don't want it in the front. So the graphic lays out all of these setbacks, puts where the surface parking lot is, and comes up with these numbers. So we have approximately 21,000 square feet of buildable area on the Main Street parking lot at 501, which is here but in front, or the side, depending on how you look at front, which is a decent size, right? It's about a half acre, or a little over a half acre. It's a nice size. You can fit a fairly decent size building on it, as you can tell from our analysis. The parking lot area that would be permitted once you take the setbacks out is about 7,100 square feet, all right? So back of the napkin type of math, we assign 300 square feet per parking stall. We do that because it takes out drive aisles. It's a very generic number. It doesn't lay the parking lot out, but it gives you a sense of how many parking spaces could be supported. So if we assume that we have about 300 square feet per space, that results in about 24 surface parking spaces. It's not bad. Our estimated number of residential units is 22 to 28 units. Again, we made some assumptions. I do have a product, a multifamily product that I used as my test to make sure that stuff would fit, and then use that to kind of analyze what the numbers would be. And I think you're safely, if you've got your 3-story building, I think you're safely in that 22 to 28 units. If you went taller, which you could, obviously each floor then adds, 6 units or so. The estimated square footage of the retail or the commercial that would be on the main floor is about 13,753 square feet. So that's the footprint that would exist. We've got 100% impervious surface coverage, meaning we can build the whole thing out, which is kind of nice. Way to go, Planning Commission. And we've got a maximum height of 45 feet that's in the Main Street zoning district, but there is the ability to ask to go taller with a conditional use permit. So there is opportunity if folks say, the economics of this don't work, I need an extra story, they have the opportunity to come in and ask for that. So if you go to the next page, because I think we covered most of this. I need to tweak this graphic a little bit, but it gives you a sense of the whole area is buildable, so the whole area is gray, right? When we say build to line, you can see those lines are actually on Laurel, and 6th. So that's that light line on the inside. So the structure would actually have to be built within that area, right? The front facade has to be built within that area. So you can see the crosshatch area. That is the parking area that would be permitted based on the setbacks. That's where that 7,000 square foot number comes from. The building isn't necessarily just the area outside the crosshatch, right? I say that because there are opportunities and ways, and a lot of developers are actually doing this, that they are building out over surface parking. And so you actually get some, it feels like underground parking, but it's not. It's covered parking, right? And so the building could actually go over the surface parking area easily, and you could have spots or spaces that are underneath it, all right? So that allows you to expand your building footprint while still maintaining some of the parking. The other piece of that is when we're looking at about 13,000 square feet of retail commercial space, that's a fair amount in terms of the market's ability to absorb that. So I would suggest that you probably don't want to get much bigger than that on that main, take some parking, and then you can expand the footprint, if you will, on the second or third story to get additional units. So a lot of developers are doing that down in the cities. You just have to make sure that they do it in a way that's architecturally interesting, because otherwise it can look pretty bad. Right, so if we move to the next site. So this site is slightly smaller, which I'm sure you can tell. So it's about 12,200 square feet, something like that. Again, we've got the same zoning, so we've got the same standards that we're looking at. On a smaller lot, you can tell that we actually have a bigger area that could be surface parking lot because this is the interior lot. So we don't have the double setback from the corner. That's why that number gets bigger. But again, like I just said, you actually can build the building out over some of the surface parking, but technically you could have 26 surface parking spaces approximately on this lot. So this one, obviously the unit count comes down. It's about 12 to 15 units. We've got about 4,000 square feet plus or minus for the retail space on the main floor, retail office space. And again, you could go taller with a conditional use permit. On this one, I actually believe I did go taller and assumed that the planning commission would be amenable to going to a 4-story because we have to get the unit count up. So when it comes down to the back of the napkin pro forma, we have to have enough units at high enough rents to support the development and make sure that it's profitable. If we take that top 4th story out, my gut was this won't be economically feasible. So anyway, I calculated it based on, just for fun, if we had a 4th story. So again, here, now we've got an interior lot. That whole back area with the crosshatch could theoretically be surface parking. I don't think you would necessarily need it, but it theoretically could be based on our new setbacks because, again, what we're trying to do is reinforce the frontage with a building. All right, the third site. This one, once again, is on a corner. This site is a little bit smaller, yet it's about 9,600 square feet. This one does get a bit tight, to be perfectly honest with you. This is another one that I thought, you're going to need a 4th story. Like, you got to get the unit counts up. The parking lot area is much smaller because we have a corner. So we've only got 4,000 square feet that would be permitted here. Still a dozen or so parking spots, which is not terrible, especially if we had 15 units or so. So you're almost parked out one parking spot per unit. I think you need to be in that neighborhood because you just don't have access to transit in the same way. And again, if we're going to try to bring more folks into the area, there's going to have to be some parking. So I was shooting for somewhere in that 1-to-1 ratio for the residential units and kind of ignoring the retail uses. So here you can see where the permitted parking area is. You can tell that the lot, interestingly enough, like, we don't end up with a site triangle issue because the site triangle is set back from the road, essentially, right of way. So in this case, we have pretty extensive sidewalk treatment, and as a result, the full area is buildable. So I'm sure I was over 20 minutes, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're over 30 maybe.
Well,
That's our, are there any questions or comments? This is fantastic information. Thank you for compiling this. Is there any comments, questions, Kevin?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fascinating stuff. I absolutely 100% appreciate the time and effort that goes into this. I find this type of work fascinating. So I got just a couple quick questions, partial comments, but where my mind is going with this is I also agree with the mindset of this type of construction in versions of downtown being critical to growth. So I've also been a party in working on some of these projects, and especially even recently. And I can tell you that where these types of projects begin to collapse is the cost of construction versus the available return. So available return on units. So, and you end up in this gridlock where we think we could get more people to our area that have higher incomes and could support this type of growth, but we can't get them until, like you said, somebody cracks a seal. Are there examples that you know of, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but where cities have played a participant in subsidizing the construction of buildings like this, again, to kind of crack that seal, to see if it can be can begin economic feasibility on these construction projects? And if so, how do these cities do this without risk? That's the big question to me, but this is fascinating stuff, and that's where I'm going with this.
yeah, so the first thing that I would answer is yes, cities do some kind of contribution or incentive to try to get developers to do projects like this. As you mentioned, the margin is typically very, very small, and the smallest, hiccup can put it in the red, and then people abandon the project, of course. So the incentives are depending on what you're comfortable with from a city risk perspective, but cities do things like TIF, for example, to underwrite some of the improvements and subsidize it. I'm working on a project right now that's an infill site where the city is putting in TIF money and then also has waived, for example, all of their park dedication fees. So there's ways to sort of write down your fees or write off some of the fees that may become very large for a developer that maybe feels like, oh, that wouldn't do much, but it actually, those $50,000 or $25,000 does have the potential to actually make or break a project in some cases, especially these smaller projects. So I'm actually pricing out a project right now down in the cities where we're doing kind of an infill very similar to this. And we're trying to figure out, it's a 16-unit building. It's got main floor commercial. It's very similar to the type of stuff that we're looking at here. And what are the types of things that, A, we could give up to make the project feasible, and B, what types of incentives does the city offer? And so some of them do things like tax abatement. That's not as frequent. TIF is the most common tool, I would say, that I've seen cities use. And then also, there are a lot of grants that are available that if the city is the one going for the grant, they partner with the developer, and together they go after it. So again, one of the projects I'm working on down in Lauderdale, they have actually partnered, or the city on behalf of the developer applies for the cleanup fund, for example. It's a dirty site. The city is only the entity that can receive the grant. The developer can't receive it, right? Most grants can't go to a private party. So the city and the developer are working together of what grants are available and working together basically to apply for those grants. So those are kind of the most common things I see.
Hang on, Jennifer. Jennifer has, Kevin.
I got one more follow-up, just one more quick follow-up, yeah. Jennifer, real quickly, is there, and I know that there's a metric kept on a lot of different developers' desks, is there currently a kind of golden number that you're looking for medium income in that market to make these projects feasible or economically viable? I know that's obviously a moving number, but historically we've always had kind of what we call those golden numbers to make certain types of projects go. Is there one right now that we're shooting that we think we need to be at?
No, so that is sort of the next step. I was talking a little bit with Jennifer about that actually earlier this week. One of the things I want to do is actually reach out to the new Baxter project. There's not a lot of new market rent product in the area. So part of it is understanding what people think they can get for market rents, right? And then we have to do a little bit more research, calling some of the builders, for example, around here that work in this, and find out what the cost per foot is for construction. So the most recent number that I got, actually it was before David left, the Thrifty White store or redevelopment project had a full construction bid. It's a couple years old at this point, so it's likely higher than what it was. But we calced it out somewhere between 155 and 160 a foot. Now, the good news is that's actually quite a bit. That's substantially less than what's going on down in the cities right now, which means that if in the cities on a per foot basis, they're making it work at 210 or 220 per foot, and you're at 160, the rents also can be proportionately lower, right? You still need to hit the target and run the pro forma, but when it comes down to it, like intuitively, you know, if you just think about how those ratios work, your per foot basis is what then the total value of the project is. The rents have to be able to so what we need to do is find out what the build costs actually are, and if 160 is the right number, then based on what market rents are, like we can do a back of the napkin of what's this gonna cost roughly, and then can we support it? Or what's the gap gonna be? Do we have a $500,000 gap? Do we have a $200,000 gap? Then we can figure out what kind of financing we need to do or can find to help fill the gap.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Mr. Chair.
That's all.
You good, Kevin?
Thank you.
All right, so we have a couple follow-ups, Jennifer, and I think Bruce wanted to talk to you. We'll go with Jennifer first, and then Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Yeager. Just back to your first question, I think a couple of different things, depending on what type of development the city is looking at or a developer is looking at, you kind of have 2 points. As Jennifer mentioned, we don't have a lot of market rate. So there are 2 different types of opportunities for funding. One is for affordable housing, where you have low-income housing tax credits, you have TIF. All of those are going to require a project to be income restricted. Then you have other opportunities for market rate. We're going to be talking about one here in a little bit. We have an opportunity for the DEED Main Street Revitalization Program. Let me go back to the affordable. We also have the Housing Trust Fund. So you have these 3 really kind of good funding sources for affordable. Then you go to market rate, and really what you have there is, tax abatement, potentially the DEED Main Street Revitalization Program, and then also there are other programs depending on what you're doing. DEED also has a redevelopment grant program, as Jennifer mentioned, that is tied to the city. The applicant must be a local unit of government, and there's also a demolition loan program. Now, when we're talking about these vacant parking lots, those obviously don't work, but when we're talking about something like Thrifty White, where it is truly a redevelopment project, those products do work.
Thanks, Jennifer. Bruce, come on up.
I guess I just wanted to ask the question and comment, if Jennifer was aware of the incentive program that the council did pass that has TIF, has abatement, has sack and whack that are gone, has permit reductions, has a lot of those things already in it, and how does that, has that been factored in? That's the main question.
Thanks, Bruce. I was going to ask that too, Jennifer. As you're moving forward and getting the numbers, pricing this out, are you aware of what the incentive structure we have in our River to Rail district?
Yeah, I knew of, I don't have the detailed list.
You know it
because
exists, though.
Yes, I do know it exists. And those are the tools or, pieces that we would look at to see if those plug the gap. Like if we run the whole thing and we have that gap, if we waive sack and whack fees, for example, what does that do to our numbers? If we have tax abatement, TIF, et cetera, can we close that gap and make the project work?
Okay, any other questions or comments to Jennifer's presentation? Mike?
I'll just say this is exciting because it's reinforcing, I think, what we've been going for and what we've been trying to figure out for downtown and some of these vacant spots. It's an interesting analysis with showing that maybe we can still have some parking there. I know it's a challenge, so but it's good to see the next step. So thank you for that.
Yeah, this is exciting. I have a business in downtown, so I'd love, to see some Marguerite Apartments down there and get those spots infilled. I have like a question. This seems to mostly be focused on, like Marguerite Apartments and that. I'm just curious, and any of the demographic data you looked at, like the millennial generation, if they're moving here, is there like a higher demand for like, say, shared workspaces? Is that something that we might see trending upwards as people are moving here? They might be working from home, but they might want shared workspaces. And then also, is there any data showing a trend towards certain generations or age groups maybe wanting to go more into starting their own business, not working remotely, but actually wanting to move to a small area to start their own business? And so if we have these, retail spaces available, can we see those getting picked up if more people are moving here that maybe want to open a business?
So the answer I would give to that is, first of all, that we'll have more employment, retail, commercial, industrial opportunities at the next meeting in a similar type of report. So that's the first thing. This was really just focused on the housing to kind of give an overview of that. The next one will talk more about that. But what I can tell you is that the shared workspaces, if you will, have had a really interesting time since the pandemic in terms of people wanting to use them and sort of this, I don't know, it's a trepidation, I guess. And so even some of the shared or co-working spaces down in the cities have really had to kind of rethink their platform and how they do that. And I don't think anybody's figured out what the answer to that is quite yet. I've seen a lot written about it and a lot of discussion, but not a lot of, we've got this figured out. So I think that trend remains to be seen in terms of the demand for that. I do have a fair amount of research that indicates that we have a lot of folks that are leaving the traditional work environment and starting their own companies. I think I just read recently that it's the top building profession, if you will, of people deciding to, abandon their desk jobs and start their own gig, right? So from that perspective, I think that trend is likely to continue based on everything that I've read. So the opportunity here is certainly the fact that rents are lower, both retail and commercial rents are lower. You've still got this Main Street small town feel and vibe, so that could certainly attract the new small business owner who, has abandoned their desk job and cubicle and are starting their own gig. So I think there's a huge opportunity for that as well, which marries really well with exactly what we're talking about in terms of the millennial and Gen Zs. I read some quote that Gen Zs don't care about money, which we'll see if that stays. Gen Zs don't care about money. They don't care how big their living spaces are. They want this work-life balance, whatever that means. And so they want to be able to do what they want to do. Like, don't we all? Is that really a generational thing? But realistically, that has the potential, obviously, to shift where they want to live as well, from the standpoint of, places like Brainerd have awesome access to trails and lakes and recreation. And so if maybe they live in a 400 square foot micro apartment up here, I'm not sure. I don't think the market has ever provided that. So.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Tony, anything?
No, I was just excited for the report that you sent out. It was very informative, and it was an enjoyable read. A lot of information there. Thank you.
Good. You're welcome.
Kelly? Anything to add?
I kind of do, but I think you might whack me.
Go ahead.
I think I just heard Jennifer, for 45 minutes, if unicorns existed, we could make a zoo and make a ton of money. I think it's great what you've done here. I hope we didn't pay you a lot of money. Okay? Here's why. Having been in business for 30 years, and you just mentioned this, I bet you're in business to make money. Oh, doggone, right? Do you know why the people left at Thrifty White? Because they didn't get their grants.
Yeah.
Right? They
Yep.
wanted to build a low housing, what we don't want more of, place that required reduced rents, Therefore, they couldn't build a nifty place that these Gen Zers wanted to spend $3,000 to $6,000 a month to live in so they could work with their internet businesses. It's all about the money. Kevin Yeager, can you do what you do for free?
Absolutely not, Mr. Bevins.
Can't do it. They pulled out because they couldn't make the money building what you think they can make the money building. The Barrywood Apartments stayed substantially empty for the first 10 years. Now, there's 6 of them out there, and they're building 2 more. Now, they're not part of, I think it's a different group, but right in that area, somebody has to believe that they can make money. I don't know. This is probably a good first step to show somebody, but somebody's going to have to take the leap.
Agreed.
Right? So
I don't disagree with anything you're saying.
Pfizer, Moderna, those people, when they found out the government was going to pay them to make vaccines, they shut everything down and made vaccines. But if they weren't going to make any money, they weren't going to make vaccines. So I don't know how to turn that from, we've got a place for these unicorns, the unicorn zoo. It's great, they can make money at this, to, I think I can make money at this. I think unicorns do exist. I'm gonna put $30 million, $10 million, some large amount of money into the thrifty white spot so I can make money. So Marie can sell donuts, so Kevin can do architecture, so I can fix cars. I think we're struggling. I don't know how to overcome that. But I think until you do that, all the planning for unicorn zoos is strictly that. That's my point. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. So I guess
For
that,
being the donor.
well, no, I love, hey, at least I don't have to be the downer.
I know. Thanks.
So that brings us, Jennifer, to what are the next steps? Where do we go with this plan, and what do you do next with the planning or marketing of these lots?
So the next piece, well, it's twofold. We have the rest of the Tier 1 properties. This isn't the only group of Tier 1 properties. This was the first group. So as I said, and as Mr. Bevins references, the reality is that we have to run the numbers. I agree 100%. If somebody doesn't think they can make money doing this, they're not going to do it. I also know, though, that we're seeing a pretty significant shift in how companies are working, how employees want to work, how and where people want to work to live. That hasn't happened in I don't think actually any of our lifetime, because the pandemic had a seismic shift in how companies are operating. So from that perspective, if you're asleep at the wheel, you won't be able to capitalize on it when the opportunity does present itself. So part of this is really figuring out, okay, what are the numbers? How do we figure out whether or not someone can make money on this? And if we can figure that piece out of what incentives, for example, might exist to close the gap, then we can go out and start reaching out to people and demonstrating through that information that there is an opportunity here that could be viable. I 100% agree that most developers, they don't want to spend the time doing this. Right? They're not going to go through the process of figuring out how short am I, and then based on how short am I, what opportunities exist to fill the gap. They'll go to the next city, right? So if we can answer some of those questions for them, then that becomes our basis for starting the marketing and reach out. So the next step is to do a little bit more research, get some better numbers on what our per foot costs are, do an analysis, a little bit more of a fit test with a real building on here to see how many units we actually get, how tall do we need to be. For example, do all of these buildings need to be 4 stories to get the unit counts up high enough that our gap is pretty low? So that's really the next step, in my opinion, is to figure out with a little bit more concrete, refined information what those numbers actually are, so we can do not a full pro forma, but a back of the napkin that gets us further along, so that when we talk to a developer, we can say, we know it's short. Here's what it's short by, here's what the city can do. are you interested?
Okay, so that's your next step. You're going to continue working on that, where you're gonna figure out the price per square foot, the market
Correct.
rents that people could get, and where,
Yep.
what the gap is of profitability. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, go ahead.
I know we're looking at this from, adding like retail ground floor and market rate apartments. Does it change anything at all if we consider like, what if it's a hotel or like an Airbnb situation? Like, I don't know if that changes anything, but is that something else that a developer might be interested in? I know Crosby's done that where they have ground floor retail and then it's like rentable units. I don't know how that changes the numbers on anything, but I just wanted to throw that out there too.
So more of like a short-term rental type of, so I actually, on one of my projects, I just did that exact exercise of doing standard market rate apartment rentals versus doing a short-term rental, and then ran my pro forma, and then talked to a bank. And the reality was that actually the bank liked my long-term market rate rental better because there was more stability. And the short-term sort of verbo type of, furnished, come stay here for 2 weeks kind of thing was much more difficult to finance.
That's the first time I've ever heard a person call verbo.
VRBO,
Yeah,
It's verbo.
that's what they call it, I don't.
tomato, tomato.
That's so many syllables to say it all.
Sorry.
So anyway, I mean, we certainly could, what my experience was on that was, A, it was more difficult to finance, and B, my numbers actually didn't turn out that much better. So we went the route of, you could always transition, a percentage of the units to a verbo later if you make the project work with a standard market sort of rent. You could always take, 30% of the units or 25% of the units and turn them into the short-term opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, as a business owner and as a community member, I'd rather see it be rentable apartments, but I just didn't know if, the numbers run differently if you look at a different model, so.
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised that they were as comparable as they were, because you have a much higher vacancy rate that you have to factor into your pro forma.
Thanks.
Okay, anything else? And, okay, you'll be back next month, in 2 months, 4 months?
Yeah, I might be on your screen, but yeah, I will be
Yeah,
back.
you'll be back next meeting. Okay,
Yep.
well, thanks for all this. This is excellent. Keep up the good work, Jennifer. Okay, that brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is the discussion on Deed Main Street Revitalization Program. Jennifer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So the Initiative Foundation was notified that they were funded for the Deed Main Street Revitalization Program in the amount of $4.5 million. I think I had mentioned that they had asked for and expected to receive about $8.4 million. I know they were disappointed, but it's still one heck of an opportunity, I think, for the city of Brainerd. I think that the EDA and the city of Brainerd is really positioned well for this. In February of 2020, 2021, you did a strategic plan where you really set out your goals as a body and what you wanted to have done. The River to Rail corridor and the initiatives that were done in the River to Rail corridor really defined an area where you wanted to see funding be focused. And then also just the information you heard from Jennifer about, kind of the demographics of our community. I think that this really positions the city of Brainerd well to be able to use the funds that the Initiative Foundation will have available. So Don Hickman is here from the Initiative Foundation and has just asked the EDA to be kind of the guiding body of where these funds are invested within the city of Brainerd. And the Initiative Foundation really would like the EDA to define or create some criteria, weighted investments, and really focus on categories for community benefits, such as childcare, workforce expansion and development, supporting the growth of business, housing, et cetera, whatever the EDA believes that those parameters should be. So with that, I know that Mr. Hickman is here and probably can help guide this and advise the EDA as to what the Initiative Foundation is looking for.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, Don Hickman. I'm the Vice President for Community and Workforce Development with the Initiative Foundation, resident of the area. I've been with the foundation for 23 years. How are we doing on time, Mr. Chair?
Does anybody
Okay.
have a hard stop time here? Mike?
Just checking. No one's ever accused me of being short of words.
Yeah, I think we got about 25 minutes for the rest of the meeting. I think Dr. O'Day's got to.
I could stay till about 9:15.
Okay.
Okay, you just signal me if I'm going on too long.
Will do.
So as Jennifer's shared, we got just under 4.5 million. Brainerd submitted the River to Rails corridor as part of our application to deed. Our current initial allocation to Brainerd is $765,000 and $765,600. When I say initial, that is what I am hoping you will recommend first-tier projects for funding for. It's a 30% state match, 70% local contribution. My presumption is that's mostly private sector contribution, though if we find public sector investments, if you can stretch those dollars by partnering, all the better. We've also set aside at least $2 million in gap lending if that helps any project go forward. It's market rate, but if somebody's got a great project but it exceeds the capital a local lender would want to lend, we'll come into the second position. As Jennifer said, probably the most urgent tasks for you is what are your criteria? There's a lot of great things. You know, 4.5 million is actually pretty near a pre-COVID record for us. We should have been popping champagne. The only trouble, as I said to Jennifer, I know Brainerd alone could have used 4.5 million. And so there's going to be disappointed people. You're going to make hard choices. What are your criteria? The two areas deed will be looking over my shoulder on is your process open and inclusive? If I'm very frank, this whole program came out of the devastation on Lake Street in the Twin Cities. Greater Minnesota legislator said we're willing to invest only if Greater Minnesota also benefits. And so we want to make sure there are no barriers due to language, ethnicity, ability, veteran status, et cetera. I'm not too worried about that in Brainerd. The second criteria that DEED will be very attentive to is to make sure our ranking committee, those who evaluate projects, don't have any conflicts of interest. So if any of you are either considering submitting a project or would materially benefit from any projects, you're a partner or contractor, then you should probably recuse yourself from the process. But I had identified in our application that EDA will be the entity that does that ranking. I've encouraged every city I've talked to, you are one of 6, to come up with a list twice as long as the money that I've initially offered. And there's several reasons. One is it's very possible, even though you rank somebody high, when it comes time to document their match, they fall short. We won't kick them out, but we'll set them aside and take the next one in line. My goal is to gut checks within about 10 days after they submit their financial information. We don't want cash flow to hold up anybody. So after you give me your ranking, it goes to my lending team. They look at the confidential private records. If the project can document match, we cut a check. What else am I eager to share? I said your initial allocation. I have 4.5 million. Any city that hasn't spent that by the date we're all to soon agree upon, Jennifer suggested October 1st, I believe. Any city that hasn't fully allocated their grant money, we'll claw that back and reallocate it to communities that have demonstrated traction. So again, you've got a lot of great projects in the community. It's why I want you to have a longer list. If without throwing anyone under the bus, there's a couple smaller communities. Well, actually, you're the second largest. So there's smaller communities that may not be able to deploy the money as quickly as you can. If they can't demonstrate traction, we'll take their money back by autumn and reallocate it to where it can go. Likewise, DEED's doing the same thing. And so I would love to show DEED that our list, we could have used that 8.5 million. And if any community can't deploy theirs, we're ready to do so. To a degree, that's the short version right now. I have a really great application online from Rochester that we can plagiarize. I've talked to Bladek about their interest in contracting out of my pocket to stand up an application after you've looked at Rochester, decided what you do and don't want to include, because you want your application to reflect the criteria, the priorities you've identified. We'll want to nail down the timeline. One suggestion is to move quickly, and I don't want to rush you, but I would suggest you might consider establishing a subcommittee to do that ranking. And I'm not lobbying you, but as an example, I spoke to the River to Rails group yesterday, and Bruce Buxton said he'd be happy to advise the ranking committee or serve on it if you were interested, and he certainly brings a great deal of expertise. I'm not saying that you don't have, but gosh, guy's been around. You can think about what other expertise you don't have in-house that might complement your debate and evaluation. My other humble suggestion is you get an odd number of people, because this is going to be hard work. To decide who you're going to invest in and who you're not, and so you may need that tiebreaker. Let me pause there and see what questions you've got.
Any questions, Kelly?
Of the 4.5, Don, what do you think Brainerd would, I mean, should we submit for all of it, or?
I've been telling communities, give me twice as long a list as your initial allocation. Bruce grinned at me and said, give them 10 times as long.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
I'll predict you'll have that many applications. I really do. And that's where your criteria, your priorities become most important. How do you weigh small business facade improvement versus adding affordable housing units or additional childcare slots? You're going to have to come up with some algorithm by which you say, here's the greatest community benefit.
And one more question. I presume there's parameters on this money, we just don't have that. We don't need it right now.
Do they have
but
this in writing or email?
Just
or?
that's what we got today.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the parameters vaguely are these key. It's basically construction, demo, pre-design, design, engineering, non-municipal infrastructure, and landscaping and streetscaping. There are still, and repair or revitalization, there's still questions. For example, all projects have to be initiated within 15 months. We need to be done in 36 from the day I signed the contract, which will probably be on Monday. So the clock really is ticking. When you consider supply chain issues and labor issues, we're going to be racing the clock. I'm hopeful DEED will give us a little grace. In presenting to Rivers to Rails yesterday, Bruce said, what is project completion? What if somebody comes in with a complex project that's 6 phases? Could we say our goal is to get through phase 4 by 36 months from now? I think that's very reasonable, but I want DEED to tell me, yep, we're good with that.
And the last question, is there a mechanism set up yet for anybody to apply, or still not yet?
No, because the key thing here is what do you want your application, what information do you want your application to have so you can have what you need to rank them. I want to keep it short and simple so we don't scare folks off. We will have assistance for anyone who's struggling with the application, but at the end of the day, it needs to reflect what do you want to know so that you can evaluate who best meets your needs.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kelly. So Don, you want the EDA to come up with the criteria
Correct.
that we are going to use to hand to the subcommittee to use to judge all of the applications that come in.
Exactly,
And then you
exactly.
need us to create a committee to review those applications. That's the
Perfect.
2 main things we have in front of us
Absolutely right.
now.
Yep.
Okay, should we be, do you need an answer today?
I do not. I'm just laying the table, and this is all laid out in this two-page memo. I should have also introduced my colleague Hannah Mayhew in the back row here. Hannah is my left and right-hand aide on this project, and if I'm ever unavailable, even though I'm local, she's probably smarter than me to begin with, and so her answer's as good as mine. If you want one of us to sit in as you're developing those criteria, happy to do so, but again, it's truly your program. Legally, technically, I'm the final say because I'm the one on the hook to deed to show that all projects were legal. If there was some project that we advanced that somehow deed said, nah, that's not consistent with the legislative language, I need to be the one that says no to that one. In addition, as you disappoint many applicants, you can always look at them and say, that darn guy down in Little Falls was the one who rejected the projects that didn't meet the threshold. So you're not the total bad guy.
Okay, might as well take that. Jennifer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So I think really what we need, or what the Initiative Foundation needs, is two things. Number one, from the EDA today, is the criteria and the appointing of a subcommittee to work on this. The other thing, as Don mentioned, and I did get an email from Tyler Glenn, Tyler has offered to administer the program on behalf of the EDA. What they would do would be to, after the criteria has been developed, work with the subcommittee to draft some guidelines and to draft an application that then would come back to the EDA at the July meeting for your approval. I think if we can at least get some parameters of criteria and appoint a subcommittee, that can help in making sure that we have everything done before the July meeting. As Don has mentioned, this is moving quickly, and so for us to be able to have all of this back to the EDA at your July meeting for approval, that means that potentially we could open up applications right after the EDA meeting. And we could have something for you to review, maybe August, I would suggest probably September.
Applications.
Yep, after, the subcommittee has reviewed them, make recommendations to the EDA. You could review those August, September. I would probably suggest September. We probably want a couple of months to allow people to put information together. But I think really the clearer we can move this, so criteria and the appointing of a subcommittee, or even just direction on criteria, so that kind of helps frame the work that the subcommittee will do prior to your July meeting.
Mike?
Without understanding 100% what the criteria is to qualify for this, I think the obvious things are housing, childcare, and then blight. I think you could put a lot of other things in that third spot, and you can consider a lot of different things as far as blight in that area. I mean, you have residential, you have the downtown sector, and some expansion out from there. I don't mind doing the subcommittee, whether I'm on it or not. It doesn't matter that much to me. Or I'm open to doing a workshop. I'm sure Kelly would love an extra meeting too.
Yeah. This is actually interesting. I think this is a good thing.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
You're ruining your reputation.
I know. Sorry. You did good, Don.
So, Don, with everything that's going on, it sounds like the EDA has some groundwork to do and to do it fast, which I'm all for. One thing I would like you to kind of dig into is the completion date, 'cause that is a huge concern.
The completion date is set. It will be initiation 15 months from the day I sign the contract, someday next week, and completion 36 months from then. I will clarify what the definition of completion is.
Yeah, just knowing all the trades in the area,
Yep.
they're booked out.
I totally understand it. It's my
Yeah.
biggest worry about
Yeah,
this whole
that's
process right now.
my main concern
Yep,
at
I
this
totally
moment.
agree.
Okay. All right, thanks.
I have no doubt that as you follow some of the links and think this through and think what you'd like to accomplish, you're going to have a lengthy list of additional questions. Just email either Hannah or I, and weekly we'll submit those questions to DEED. And they've been pretty responsive about then trying to respond to them. I really admire the fellow who's in charge of the program. I am a little surprised how often he says, "We didn't think of that. I'll get back to you next week." And that's what happens when you're deploying hundreds of millions of dollars in short order. Some things haven't been thought through, and so we appreciate your critical thinking. I don't think supply chains or labor shortages were top of mind when this program was first stood up.
Jennifer?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I hear for criteria, at least from Commissioner O'Day, is housing, childcare, and blight. Are there other criteria you think, workforce development? Are there other criteria you think should be focused on with this funding?
Well, yeah, let's take a step back from that. Do we want to, as a commission, just spitball criteria here today and call it done, or should we call like a work session to meet next week so we can all look at the Rochester application and kind of chew on it for a few days?
I like the second choice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I may, we don't know what we don't know. If we limit our applications to certain criteria, we may be missing out on something that we never thought of. So I would like to see it as open as possible. I don't disagree with you, Mr. O'Day, that that's probably the directive, but I'd like to see it as less restrictive as possible.
Okay, Shep's Patio next Thursday at 6?
I think that'll work.
No. What time does work for anybody for a meeting next week, though, for a work session next week?
I like after 5.
I think after 5, I like after 5.
You too.
What day?
What day doesn't work for you? We'll pick a different one.
I can squeeze anything in, just what day were you thinking?
I don't know, I should probably look at my calendar.
Jennifer, do you have city calendar by any chance in front of you? Could you pull that up?
I do.
Sorry.
John, when do you guys?
So
Need
in,
this.
in truth, we are negotiable. If you get into this and say, we need 45 days to get the application online and open, we'll work with you. Again, my goal is, it's construction season now. Some of the folks with shovel-ready stuff had hoped to break ground this spring. So the sooner we can move forward, the better, but I don't want to rush you. You need to be deliberative as to what it is you're trying to reward or incentivize. What would happen without incentives? What won't happen without incentives? That's an important conversation for you all to have. And so you're going to come back to me once you've decided, here's what we want to prioritize, here's the timeline we can live with, and here's who will rank projects. And then we can get quite serious about how all the other dates follow that. Again, what the ticking clock says, initiation within 15 months, completion in 36. So that's the rush. Anything else is somewhat negotiable. The other date that I'll ask all 6 cities to chime in on, and pulling this out of the air, but I've suggested October 1st is a day where if you haven't allocated the original money that each city got, I'll be looking to reallocate it to those that have demonstrated traction. And if I get pushback on October 1st, I mean, there's nothing magic about that. We could make it November 1st if it took longer to stand up our programs, but I want that money out there working. And there's folks eager to invest in the 6 downtowns. I want to reward them.
I like 8th. Can we do June 8th? Let's do Wednesday at 5 o'clock here in the council chambers. And instead of a work session, can we call it a special meeting so we can make a decision? I can appoint the committee at that time. I can get some input, or we can appoint a committee at that time, get input on who wants to be on it.
Absolutely. We'll call it a special meeting and get it posted.
So we'll have a special meeting Wednesday, June 8th at 5 o'clock. Everybody review that Rochester application. Think about what criteria we should be
I'll get that to you today.
having the committee judge it on. And if you want to serve on the committee, let me know. Bruce, I'll try and get you on the committee. We need an odd number of people, not Tony. Okay, anything else, Don?
No, I'll come up with a deed recommended conflict of interest form. As Bruce and I were joking yesterday, we all have conflicts of interest. You just need to enumerate them and put them out front so that nobody thinks you are hiding something as you start ranking projects.
Yeah, they would appreciate that.
Yes, and thank you, and I do hope, I mostly spoke about clawing back money from other cities in my region that don't use it all, but my real hope is that other communities, other grant recipients don't use all theirs, and that DEED calls me up and says, holy cow, do you have appetite for this program? Here's that $4 million we shorted you. That would be my best day of the year.
Let's hope that happens.
I do. Thank you for having me, and I expect we're going to get to know each other quite well here in the coming months.
Yeah, thank you for the great
Okay.
news, Don. Okay, that ends new business, brings us to informational, and that is Visit Brainerd. Mary Devine Johnson, come on down.
Good morning. I'm just here to do a quarterly update on what we're doing as far as the marketing and advertising contract. And there isn't anything terribly earth-shattering that's been in the report. We're working on the campaign for targeting shoppers, people to come visit and shop and patronize Brainerd specifically in the summer. And so that'll be a multimedia campaign where we're doing radio ads, and we'll be doing some print advertising, and we'll be doing a little bit of online advertising as well. We're going to stick with the same theme that we had done for the You Betcha campaign for the CARES Act recovery, where we identify and talk about the neighborhoods. So naming the neighborhoods of downtown, you've got Mill Avenue, South 6th, trying to give geographic reference to where people can shop. Because as we all know, Brainerd means a lot of things to everybody that doesn't live here, right? And so that was the key message for the advertising campaign that we'll be getting going there. Previous month, I had mentioned in my report that we were going to do a website, and I did a what do you think? I want to know what you think mostly, but I'm also just proceeding ahead. That's what I think the key message should be, is that I purchased the domain brainerd.works. And I'm building out a page for the initiatives related to finding jobs, and we can build upon it for anything that comes with the other economic development initiatives under the advertising contract as it comes along. So I think there's still some work to do on working with businesses to see if they want to do a cooperative advertising campaign. I've been researching ad prices for LinkedIn advertising, Twitter advertising. It's a much more direct advertising approach when you're trying to promote, you should live here, there are jobs for you here, and that kind of thing. So that's where the two campaigns that I'm working on right now are at. I'm open to questions, suggestions. If anybody wants more specifics, let me know.
Questions or comments?
I think you're doing a great job.
It doesn't take, thank you. It doesn't take long to spend $15,000. So, I mean, they're not huge ad campaigns, but you'll start hearing them on the radio here in the next week or so. And we're going to go in and cut the ads over the next couple days. And so it'll be fun to start seeing things back out. And we've got people here. If anybody's noticed, traffic picked up. So our second residents and our visitors are coming, and that's always good news. Just anecdotally, with the Visit Brainerd location in downtown, we definitely saw and heard feedback from people from the CARES Act campaign in 2020, right? So both the summer campaign and the holiday campaign worked. You know, people hear it, they come, they say, oh, we had no idea. So those things will work for a top-of-mind awareness campaign, so.
Thank you, Mary. Any other questions? Kelly, waste of money or great
So
great
far,
work?
so good. I like it.
Yeah, he loves it.
You betcha.
Okay, thank you. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm always available by email or stopping in or anything, so appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, that brings us to item 8, staff reports, city administrator.
Since it's almost 9 o'clock, I think you have your plate full, and I have nothing else to add.
Thank you. HRA report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. Just a quick recap. We did do some strategic planning last month, and so we are now in the process of getting that plan kind of cobbled together and get that back out to our board. So we're looking forward to next steps to that. And then we continue to work on 3 parcels to get those conveyed to the HRA for infill projects. It'll be 2 homes is what we're hopeful for Right now, we're doing some research, city's doing some research on the assessments that are assessed to those 3 parcels to see if there's anything that we need to go and present to council. So still probably a couple of months out on that, but still moving forward. And then if John's got any updates.
I really don't have much. Got a couple homes we're working on rehab on, unless there's any questions for me.
Any questions in John's written report?
Thank
Seeing
you.
none. Thanks, John. Thanks, Eric. Brings us to 9, commissioners' comments. Commissioner O'Day.
Some exciting stuff today, I think. Looking at both the reports from Swanson and Haskamp and the Initiative Foundation, I think I'm just looking at this map and thinking of a lot more things than I initially did, not realizing that it included 210.
I know, isn't that amazing?
Yeah, so, yeah, excited about those projects moving forward, and that's about all I have to add.
Commissioner Bevins.
I think Mike O'Day hit the nail on the head with amazing that there's government money for 210 projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Yeager.
Nothing to add, sir.
Commissioner Beazer.
Nothing to add.
Commissioner Kirsch.
Just be sure to check out the Main Street Matters podcast, which is live now. You can check it out on the iHeartRadio app, and I believe it's on a couple other podcast platforms. So first topic is mindset and balance. So even if you're not a small business owner, I think it's a great listen. So be sure to check it out. And the Downtown Here for Good Market starts Tuesday the 7th from 3 to 6. So be sure to come visit us downtown on Tuesdays.
All right, thank you. I listened to the podcast. Excellent programming. I recommend it. And with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Evans. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion